What does it take to completely reinvent yourself? To erase a world-famous persona and build another, even more powerful one from scratch? We're not talking about a simple career change. We're talking about a psychological metamorphosis, a relentless obsession with the total control of one's own image. Welcome to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Today, we will dissect the mind behind one of the most unlikely fashion empires and analyze the architecture of a perfection that may have been built on the foundations of insecurity and a narcissistic need for validation. If you're ready to question everything you think, subscribe, like this video, and prepare yourself, because the truth is always more complex and darker than the polished surface we are shown. The transition from Victoria Adams to Victoria Beckham, and subsequently from Posh Spice to an acclaimed fashion designer, was not a simple rebranding. It was a calculated assassination of a persona. Dark psychology teaches us that to control the narrative, you must first destroy the old versions of yourself in the public's mind. Victoria understood this with surgical precision. Posh Spice was a caricature, the rich, moody girl with questionable fashion taste. To become the austere and respected figure she is today, that version of herself needed to be publicly annihilated, not through denial, but through a systematic and relentless replacement with a new identity, so controlled and perfect that the old one would become a distant joke, a kitsch memory. This process of identity annihilation is a large-scale tactic of perception manipulation. Victoria stopped smiling in photos, a conscious decision to project seriousness and distance herself from the frivolous image of a pop star. She adopted a uniform of neutral colors and impeccable cuts, creating a visual barrier against the colorful and chaotic past of the Spice Girls. Every public appearance, every interview, was meticulously choreographed to reinforce the new narrative, that of the serious businesswoman, the creative mind, the embodiment of perfection. The coldness that many criticized was, in fact, her most powerful weapon, a psychological shield that commanded respect where there was once only youthful adoration. What does this teach us about control? That public perception is malleable, but it demands a sacrifice. Victoria sacrificed spontaneity, apparent vulnerability, and likability in exchange for something far more valuable for her goals: the respect of the fashion elite, a notoriously snobbish and closed-off world. She demonstrated a Machiavellian understanding that to be accepted into a new circle of power, you can't just ask to enter. You must transform yourself into the person they would already respect, even if it means erasing who you were. The death of Posh Spice was the necessary initiation ritual. This metamorphosis also reveals a deep understanding of mass psychology. The public is easily bored and craves transformation narratives. Victoria didn't just change careers. She offered a story of rising against the odds, from a wag, wives and girlfriends of high-profile sportsmen, to a fashion icon. This narrative is addictive and inspiring, but it is also a smokescreen. While we admire the success story, we are distracted from the relentless psychological tactics that made it possible, such as the obsessive control of her image and the suppression of any personality trait that didn't fit the new mold. In the end, the calculated coldness and the refusal to conform to past expectations were both her liberation and her prison. Liberation because it allowed her to transcend her beginnings, and a prison because it condemned her to maintain this facade of perfection forever. Any slip-up, any ill-timed smile, any misstep could shatter the illusion she spent decades building. The death of Posh Spice was not a one-time event, but a continuous process of vigilance and control, a dark reminder of the price of total reinvention. Victoria Beckham's fashion empire is not just a business. It is the physical manifestation of her psyche. Psychology defines narcissism not just as self-love, but as a desperate need to see oneself reflected with admiration in the eyes of others. The Victoria Beckham brand is exactly that, a mirror. The clothes she designs, minimalist, structured, severe, and undeniably chic, are the embodiment of the image she has projected for herself. By dressing other women in her aesthetic, she, in fact, transforms them into extensions of her own identity, validating her taste, her vision, and ultimately, her own self-worth. Each collection is an exercise in narcissistic control. The silhouettes are rigorous, the color palettes are restrained. There's no room for chaos or imperfection, because in the mind of a perfectionist with narcissistic tendencies, imperfection is synonymous with existential failure. She isn't just selling clothes. She's selling an idealized version of herself. The success of her brand has become the ultimate proof that her worldview, her aesthetic, and her identity are not only valid but desirable and worthy of being bought at a high price. This goes beyond profit. It is the validation of her very existence. This need for external validation is often rooted in a deep internal insecurity. Why was the opinion of fashion critics, a notoriously difficult group to please, so crucial to her? Because earning their respect would be the cure for the narcissistic wound of not being taken seriously. Being seen as a wag or a mere pop star was a humiliation for someone with her ambitions. The obsession with creating a legitimate luxury brand wasn't just about a passion for fashion. It was about forcing the world to recognize her intelligence, her taste, and her power, erasing the perception that she was just David Beckham's wife. The way she uses her own body as the primary marketing tool is another classic trait. She is the perfect hanger for her creations, the silent and constant ambassador of her brand. This creates a narcissistic feedback loop. She projects an image of perfection, creates clothes that embody this image, wears these clothes to reinforce the image, and then sells this image to consumers who aspire to that same perfection. It is a brilliant and self-sustaining psychological ecosystem, where the product and the creator are indistinguishable, and admiration for one automatically transfers to the other. What can we learn from this? That ambition, when mixed with narcissism and insecurity, can be an almost infinite fuel. The need to prove her worth, to silence her critics, and to see her idealized reflection in the world drove Victoria Beckham to build an empire from scratch, in an industry that was ready to reject her. It is a powerful demonstration of how psychological wounds, instead of breaking us, can be channeled into a relentless driving force for success, even if the personal cost of this incessant search for external validation is immense. Victoria Beckham's discipline is legendary, but when we analyze it through the lens of dark psychology, it reveals itself as more than just willpower. It is a manifestation of an obsessive need for control, projected onto one of the few areas a human being can completely dominate, their own body. The revelation that she has eaten the same meal of grilled fish and steamed vegetables for 25 years is not a mere dietary quirk. It is the symptom of a mindset that finds safety in rigidity and ritual. In a chaotic world of fame, media, and business, her plate is her sanctuary of order, a domain where there are no surprises and where she holds absolute power. Psychologically, such extreme regimens are often linked to an attempt to manage internal anxiety. When the outside world feels uncontrollable, focusing on strict rules about food and exercise provides a sense of agency and predictability. Every calorie counted, every workout executed, is a small victory in the war against chaos. For Victoria, who has lived under relentless media scrutiny since she was a teenager, her body became the fortress where she could dictate all the rules. This iron discipline is not just about health or appearance. It's a psychological survival strategy. This mentality of total control extends beyond her diet. It is the same discipline she applied to learning about fabrics, cuts, and finances to build her brand. She transformed discipline, a generally admired virtue, into a weapon. A weapon against the critics who underestimated her. A weapon against the entropy of business, and a weapon against her own insecurities. By presenting herself as the personification of discipline, she sends a powerful message. She's not someone who leaves things to chance. She is an architect, not just of clothes, but of her own life and body. However, this obsession with control has a dark side. It can lead to isolation and a lack of spontaneity, as evidenced by her famous lack of smiles or the rigidity of her public persona. The need to maintain control at all costs can create a barrier between the individual and the messier, more genuine human experiences. The joy of a shared meal without rules, the freedom of an unstructured day, these are potential casualties in the war for self-control. What appears as external strength may, in fact, be a self-imposed prison. Asterisk. What Victoria's journey teaches us about discipline is its duality. It can be the tool that lifts us from mediocrity to excellence, but it can also become the cage that prevents us from living fully. The same force that built her empire is the one that confines her to a plate of fish for decades. It's a reminder that in human psychology, our greatest strengths are often the other side of our greatest vulnerabilities. The relentless pursuit of control is at its core a silent admission of the deep fear of losing it. Victoria Beckham's facade of immaculate perfection is so impressive that it's easy to forget the most important question: what is she hiding? In psychology, extreme perfectionism is not a sign of confidence, but its opposite. It is armor built to protect a core vulnerability, a deep-seated insecurity. The need for every photo to be flawless, every outfit perfectly aligned, and every public statement carefully measured, is born from the terrifying fear of being exposed as a failure, as inadequate as the imposter that skeptics always claimed she was. Perfection is not the goal. It is the defense mechanism. Let's consider her origins in fame. She was not the strongest vocalist in the Spice Girls. She was nicknamed Posh, a label that put her in a box before she could even define herself. From the beginning, she was positioned as the most stylish, but perhaps the least musically talented. This initial narrative may have planted a seed of insecurity that blossomed into a relentless need to prove her worth in another arena, an arena she could completely dominate. Fashion became her battlefield for redemption, the place where she could finally be the best, the most respected. The obsessive control over her image and that of her family is another manifestation of this insecurity. The Beckham brand is a carefully curated family project where each member plays a role in the overall narrative of success and elegance. This serves a dual purpose. It protects her family from the chaotic scrutiny she herself faced, and, crucially, it reinforces the image of a perfect, successful life, acting as a shield against any doubts about her competence as a businesswoman, wife, and mother. The image of the perfect family is the ultimate defense against the criticism that something in her life might be imperfect. Perfectionism, when driven by insecurity, can also be a form of passive manipulation. By presenting an unattainable standard of excellence, you subtly make others around you feel inadequate. Colleagues, employees, and even the public can feel pressured to match this level of perfection, giving the perfectionist a tacit control over their environment. The untouchable aura that Victoria projects is not accidental. It is a psychological boundary that keeps people at a safe distance, where they cannot see the potential cracks in the armor. Ultimately, Victoria's story is a powerful lesson in how insecurity can be the most potent engine for achievement. The fear of not being good enough drove her to work harder, learn more, and control more than any of her peers. She transformed what many would consider a paralyzing weakness into her greatest driving force. However, the dark question remains: when the engine of insecurity drives you to the top, does it simply turn off? Or are you left forever running, fleeing from a feeling of inadequacy that, no matter how successful you become, never truly goes away? We're only halfway through unraveling the complex psychology of Victoria Beckham. If this analysis is making you see things in a new way, take a second to hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Most importantly, comment below which public figure you want us to analyze in the next The Truth video. Your suggestions guide us into the darkness. Now let's get back to it. In a world of celebrities screaming for attention, Victoria Beckham has mastered the art of silent power. Her refusal to smile, her reserved posture, and her concise responses to the press are not signs of arrogance, as many interpret them, but rather a highly effective narrative control strategy. Dark psychology teaches that the one who speaks less often holds more power in an interaction. Silence creates a vacuum that others feel compelled to fill, often revealing their own intentions and insecurities. Victoria's austerity forces journalists, critics, and the public to project their own meanings onto her, allowing her to remain enigmatic and, therefore, in control. This tactic is a form of negative power. Instead of actively asserting herself, she asserts herself through absence. The absence of a smile, the absence of an over-explanation, the absence of performative warmth. This makes her an intimidating and hard-to-read figure. People don't know how to react to her, and this uncertainty gives them a psychological disadvantage. She doesn't play the likability game expected of female celebrities. Instead, she sets her own terms of engagement, forcing the world to adapt to her, not the other way around. It is a subtle but immensely effective power play. The austerity of her public persona also serves as a filter. It repels those who seek superficial celebrity and attracts an audience that values substance, seriousness, and mystery. This was crucial for her transition into luxury fashion. The image of a bubbly, accessible pop star would never sell $1,000 dresses to the global elite. The image of an enigmatic, serious woman with impeccable taste, however, would. Her silence and seriousness are not just personality traits. They are carefully cultivated brand assets, designed to communicate exclusivity and sophistication. This strategy, however, has its risks. The same austerity that commands respect can be perceived as coldness and detachment, making it difficult to create a genuine emotional connection with her audience. She is admired, perhaps not loved in the same way as other public figures, who project more warmth. Victoria seems to have made a conscious calculation. She traded mass adoration for the admiration of a powerful niche. It is a Machiavellian bet on the idea that in the long run, respect is worth more than affection for the longevity of her empire. By observing Victoria's trajectory, we learn a powerful lesson about communication and power. In an era of overexposure, mystery has become the ultimate luxury. Withholding information, speaking with intention, and using silence as a tool can create an aura of power that noisy eloquence rarely achieves. She shows us that sometimes the strongest statement you can make is to say nothing at all, forcing the world to lean in to hear what you might finally decide to share. The Beckham brand, both personal and commercial, walks a fine line between inspiration and manipulation. On one hand, Victoria's story is undeniably inspiring. A woman who defied expectations, overcame skepticism, and built a successful business on her own terms. She represents the possibility of self-reinvention, a testament to the power of ambition and hard work. Millions of people look to her and see proof that it's possible to change your stars, an ideal of female empowerment and entrepreneurial success. This narrative is powerful and in many ways, genuinely positive. However, the lens of dark psychology forces us to question the nature of this inspiration. The image of perfection she projects is so curated and unattainable that it can inadvertently manipulate the insecurities of her audience. By presenting a standard of beauty, success, and family life that is virtually impossible to replicate, she may be generating more anxiety and feelings of inadequacy than genuine empowerment. The consumer who buys a Victoria Beckham dress is not just buying an item of clothing. She's buying a fragment of a fantasy. An attempt to get closer to an ideal that has been designed to be always just slightly out of reach. This is a subtle form of aspirational manipulation. The luxury industry thrives on this, creating a desire for a status or feeling that the product only symbolizes but cannot truly deliver. Victoria has mastered this by linking her brand to her own mythical persona. The implicit promise is that, by adopting her aesthetic, you can absorb a bit of her power, her elegance, her control. This creates a cycle of desire and consumption that is highly profitable, but is based on exploiting the gap between people's reality and the fantasy they crave. The meticulous control over her family's image also falls into this ambiguous territory. Is it a way of protecting her children, or a way of using them as props in the construction of brand Beckham? The public display of a perfect family life serves as a powerful endorsement for the brand's authenticity and values. But what is the psychological cost to the individuals involved in this constant performance? The line between sharing one's life and commodifying one's life becomes dangerously thin, turning genuine relationships into public relations assets. The legacy of Victoria Beckham will therefore be perpetually dual. She will be remembered as an inspiration, a pioneer who broke barriers. But also, for those who look closer, she will be a case study in the subtle manipulation of the modern era. A master of using the tools of media and perception to build an ideal that serves, above all, her own interests and the perpetuation of her empire. The final question is not whether she is an inspiration or a manipulator, but rather the understanding that at the highest levels of power and influence, the two often become the same thing. The enduring fascination with Victoria Beckham, with her perfection, her discipline, and her reinvention, reveals more about ourselves than it does about her. Why are we so drawn to this figure of control and austerity? The answer lies in our own anxieties and desires. In an increasingly chaotic, unpredictable, and noisy world, the image of someone who seems to have absolute control over every facet of her life is incredibly seductive. She represents a fantasy of order and mastery that many of us secretly crave. In our own lives, our admiration for her perfect facade exposes our own ambivalent relationship with vulnerability. We criticize her for not smiling, for being cold, yet at the same time, we buy her clothes, follow her movements, and keep her on a pedestal of cultural relevance. This suggests that while we may preach the importance of authenticity, we are deeply attracted to the power and security that the armor of perfection seems to offer. Perhaps we see her as an idealized version of ourselves, the person we would be if we had the discipline to control our impulses and hide our flaws. Her journey, from pop star to designer, also satisfies our cultural need for narratives of transformation and redemption. We love an underdog story, especially one where someone proves their critics wrong. By rooting for her, we are, in a way, rooting for our own ability to reinvent ourselves and overcome the limiting perceptions others have of us. She is the avatar of our own unrealized ambitions, the proof that it's possible to force the world to see us in a new light, if we have the iron will to do so. However, our fascination also has a darker side. It shows our complicity in the culture of perfection that generates so much anxiety, especially for women. By elevating figures like Victoria Beckham to icon status, we are perpetuating an unattainable standard that contributes to the insecurity and dissatisfaction we feel in our own lives. We consume the fantasy of perfection, even knowing that it is harmful, creating a vicious cycle where the demand for these images fuels their continuous supply. Ultimately, Victoria Beckham functions as a psychological mirror for our society. In her, we see reflected our fears of chaos, our desire for control, our admiration for power, and our complicated relationship with authenticity and perfection. Analyzing her is not just about understanding the mind of a famous woman. It's about understanding the hidden currents that shape our own values, aspirations, and insecurities. She is not just a product of our culture. She is a reflection of it. And perhaps, the darkest truth of all is that her obsession with perfection only exists because our own obsession feeds it. The facade of perfection is one of the most powerful tools in dark psychology. Victoria Beckham used it to build an empire. What do you think? Is it a case of genius and discipline, or of deep narcissism and insecurity? The truth, as always, lies in the shadows. If you want to continue uncovering the hidden psychology behind the world's most influential figures, make sure you are subscribed to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive. Leave your opinion and your theories in the comments below. We read them all. Until next time, and remember, question everything.